I'm Danny Benjamin. I'm professor of pediatrics at Duke University, and I'm the chair of the Pediatric Trials Network and its principal investigator. One of the great difficulties about pediatric drug development is in regards to the generic drugs. These are off-patent drugs which, although that's very good for pricing, companies, once molecules go off patent, stop studying drugs. They simply have to show that the exposure may be similar between healthy adults, but they never really have to show the exposure in children. Networks are a way of reducing the barriers to doing clinical trials, and they have proven to be especially important in the conduct of difficult to study populations. The Pediatric Trials Network is comprised of physicians and pharmacologists and chemists and toxicologists who have expertise in drug development in children. So the Pediatric Trials Network, which was assembled by the National Institute of Health in 2010, has a leadership team from Duke University, Children's Mercy in Kansas City, and University of California, San Diego, and Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And 80 sites throughout the United States form the Pediatric Trials Network. In partnership with the NIH, we decide which molecules to study. These are prioritized by pediatricians and pharmacologists from around the United States as far as what they think are important to public health to see studied in children. We then use the network to reduce the barriers to do these studies by having a common contract across all network sites to make the startup of studies more rapid, to have investigators who are committed to doing the study available and on site at each of these sites, and to have study coordinators and other important regulatory supports for the investigators in order to get the trials done. We've been exceedingly pleased with the success of the network to date. In the 2010-2011 academic year, the team brought up 10 different projects, actively enrolling now 6 different trials, and in the first 12 months completed their first trial from signature of contract with NIH to the completion of the study. This is a remarkable achievement. When compared to doing other off-patent studies in children sponsored by NIH without the aid of a network, the following slide provides a nice contrast. In the study of meropenem, which several of us in the Peds Trials Network were fortunate to be able to lead, had the NIH asked for a request for proposals and was ultimately signed between the lead investigators and National Institute of Health, and that took 24 months. We then had to get an investigational new drug application through the Food and Drug Administration. That took an additional 5 months. By the time the first patient was enrolled, that was an additional 3 months. The last infant enrolled was 14 months later. By the time the clinical study report, the information that goes back to Food and Drug Administration for the trial was done, that was 60 months from the time the request for proposal was released. In our recently completed metronidazole trial, which we led as a team, the Pediatric Trials Network request for proposal was released in March of 2010. We signed it 6 months later. 1 month after that, we were holding an IND. 2 months after that, we had our first patient enrolled. 9 months after that, we had our last patient enrolled. And the clinical study report went in 22 months after the release of the RFP. This is 2/3 more rapidly than what we'd done with meropenem. And meropenem was the most successful, the most rapidly enrolling, and the most quickly completed trial done of the off-patents without the use of the network. And yet, even compared to the best of those trials, metronidazole was much, much, much more efficient and much less costly, at about a 2/3 price reduction as well for very similar data. Why were we able to achieve such better metrics and at such a reduced rate? Well, with the Pediatric Trials Network in place, we were able to have investigators come to the table and be doing work in collaboration very early in the study. We were able to get contracts in place very early on. These were contracts that we then were able to move quickly through the system. This reduced a lot of our timelines. We didn't have to negotiate with every small step along the way. This allowed for a much more efficient team, a much greater use of time, and because the team knew that it would be quickly reassembling, they did not have to have in place the infrastructure paid for by the trial beyond the trial, because they knew the next trial was coming on board shortly thereafter, and they would not have to hire or rehire or let a study coordinator go at the beginning or end of the trial. So they had a trained team that could go into the trial. They were able to keep the team intact together at both the site and centrally, and they were able to move that team forward. As far as the Pediatric Trials Network in 2011, as shown on this slide, we have gotten together the following cluster of trials. One on hypertension, one or high blood pressure, the study of metronidazole, which is an antibiotic which treats a very serious belly infection in babies, hydroxyurea, which is used for children with sickle cell disease, acyclovir for babies who have a herpes virus infection in the brain, the opportunistic studies, which allow for the study of multiple drugs at the same time, and the details of that study's conduct, which is a unique attribute of the Pediatric Trials Network, will be explained in a subsequent video. Lisinopril pharmacokinetics for children who've had a kidney transplant, and several other studies around ampicillin, midazolam, getting ready for some of the trials that we will be doing in obesity, and a device that will be used to accurately measure children in the critical care setting and in resource poor settings where there is no electricity, such as developing countries. So the early successes of the Pediatric Trials Network really have been the rapid development, deployment, design, and implementation of 10 projects, 6 actively enrolling trials, and 1 trial that's been completed for which data will go to FDA in the first quarter of 2012. The considerable efficiencies that we've gained in both pricing and in timelines as it relates to doing clinical trials, and that our vision for 2012 includes a greater focus on some emerging public health problems such as methicillin-resistant Staph aureus infections and the emerging obesity epidemic in the United States, and proper dosing for those children.